Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Andy Flush of Andy Flush Films, and I just want to introduce everyone to the channel. I'm going to be speaking to everyone about lots of things to do with cameras, filmmaking, video making, videography, bit of photography, and to be honest, anything else I want to talk about when it comes up. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about camera gear and what I'm using at the moment, the kind of things I have, the kind of things I use on shoots, things I've added to over the collection over the last couple of years, and maybe things I want to get in the future as well. Let's start with the camera. I am running a Sony a7S Mark II. The camera's about 5 years old now, so it's not the newest of technologies, but in my opinion, it is still one of the best on the market at that price range for video making and photography. The camera is a hybrid, so we are looking at both very high quality video and stills. 12 megapixels, so it's a little bit small on the photography side. You do lose some of that, huge photo scale ability, but the sensor is absolutely fantastic. It's known as one of the best low light cameras on the market, so for me and what I do, that is a real massive benefit to this camera, and it is the main reason I bought this specific camera when I first started doing this. The low light ability, it is unbelievable. You'll have heard about people talking about it, but it is fantastic. I mean, really, I've got this light set up now, but there's so many times I don't need lights. I don't shoot with lights, and really you can just get so much out of the camera with its own internal light boosting capabilities. You push ISO on this camera up to 4, 5, 6,000 plus, and you're still getting a very good image, especially if you're shooting in 4K. You really can still make a fantastic image out of that, which is really important for a lot of the shoots I do. If I'm shooting theatre stuff or I'm shooting on location, run and gun style, which is a lot of the work I do, you don't always have the ability to change the lighting setup or to add lights. A lot of the times it's, right, cool, we need you here, you're going to film this now, you've got 5 minutes to do it. I don't have time to set up lights, and running a one-man band operation, I don't always have the ability to set up lights either. I don't have the setup, I don't have the space, whatever it might be. So a camera that does low light that well is really important for me. The next best thing about the Sony is it's full frame, so you're getting a really, really nice, clean image. The lower Sony cameras are fantastic, the micro four thirds ones, they're still great. To be honest, a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily notice a difference, but there's a certain look to the full frame sensor, which personally I think is fantastic and really does kind of step you up a tiny bit in that level. The one downside to the full frame is that obviously lenses, you need full frame lenses, which are expensive, especially if you get on the Sony route. The average price for a lens is at least 300, 400 quid, whereas if you're on APS-C lenses, you can get ones a lot cheaper, and you can also use vintage lenses, you can use more different types of lenses. So if you're buying full frame, bear in mind the price is always going to be a factor when you're buying new lenses. I run a range of Sony lenses, Sony first party lenses, which you're always going to get you're probably going to get the best auto focus, your electronic elements to the lens. You're probably going to get the best out of Sony cameras. For me, autofocus is something I use a lot. We'll talk about it more in a different video, but it is for a run and gun videographer. Again, running on my own a lot of the time, autofocus being good is something that's really, really helpful, and it definitely is something that I would rely on in a camera like this. You see a lot of people these days who will run on one of the Blackmagic cameras or something, and yes, the image is a lot better, you're getting a lot more cinematic film-like image, but losing those autofocus electronic capabilities for me would be a game changer, and not something that would really work for the type of work that I often do. The camera's stills ability is also fantastic. Again, I mentioned that it's only 12 megapixel. I don't know if you're blowing up photos to a large scale for print, that might be an issue. Personally, I don't really do that yet, and for online, for going on smaller scale things, the 12 megapixels is more than enough, and especially when the image is such a high quality in the first place, it's really never been an issue for me. Again, you get all of the autofocus, all of those abilities you get in the stills. I think it's 4 frames a second, so maybe not the best if you're shooting sports or something where you need a lot of kind of bursts of photos, but for me and what I do, every time I'm taking photos, whether it's paid or whether it's just for myself, the images is more than enough, and I've actually been very impressed over the years as I've kind of learned more about photography and learn more about that kind of skill. I've been very impressed with the camera and actually how it holds up in a photography line when the camera, in theory, is not built for that. It's not designed specifically as a stills camera, but that's where the hybrid comes in, and I think that's why it's still one of the most popular cameras on the market, because it's so good for both of those things. Right, moving on to lenses, we have the Sony 50mm, Sony 50mm, Nifty 50 as people call them. This is a lens I bought only about a year or two ago, and to be honest, it's a fantastic lens. For video, not the fastest autofocus, not the most accurate, so there is those downsides, but for photography, for me, this is a fantastic lens. 1.8, so very fast lens. You can get a really nice depth of field, lovely drop off in the background, which obviously can be great for stills. As a portrait lens, this is one of my favorites. I know people often shoot further, they shoot 85s, things like that, but for me, the look you get taking photos of people with this lens is fantastic. If I'm setting up interviews or something like that for video, if I'm recording someone for a longer period of time when they're maybe not moving around as much, or the autofocus isn't as important, then this is absolutely a lens I'd use. You get, as I said, you get a really nice depth of field. You know, you're gonna throw the background out, so it doesn't really matter where you are. You can shoot in a fairly blank setting and you're still gonna get a nice image of someone's face with this. And of course, being a fast lens, 1.8, if you're shooting in a lower light, this also works very well. So this is a lens I'd really recommend. Sony FE 50mm, and it's not particularly expensive either. Moving on to the kit lens. This is the lens I got first. This lens is about £300 now, I think. This is the Sony 28-70mm lens, and for the longest time, this was the only lens I had and the lens I used on almost everything. This is a very solid lens. Incredibly fast autofocus, no pulsation on the lens when you're doing the focus, really. Very, very light, which is fantastic for gimbal work. A lot of the stuff I do is on gimbals, moving around. This lens, honestly, there's nothing to it. It's very, very light, which makes it great for that kind of thing. 28-70 is a pretty good zoom range. You're gonna get most of the focal ranges that you want for your average shoot on a lens like this. Obviously, we're not particularly zoomed in at 70mm, so if you're shooting stuff that's further away, this lens isn't going to cut it, and 28 isn't the widest thing in the world, so this is kind of a very mid-range lens, but for the price and for the weight, which makes it fantastic, as I said, on gimbals or anything moving around, this is a really, really good lens, so I'd highly recommend that one as a kit lens or as a first lens if you're buying this camera or one of the Sony full-frame cameras. The only lens I own that isn't actually a Sony lens is my Samyang 14mm. This is definitely a specific lens, if that makes sense. This is not a lens that you're going to use a hell of a lot, and it's not a lens that's going to work for a ton of different uses. For me, the 14mm is primarily something I bought for a certain type of video I was doing. Some of the work I've done is in property, in house tours, trying to make a space look as big and spacious as possible, which a wide lens like this is great for. This isn't a fisheye lens, so you're not getting any distortion in theory. There is a slight drop off at the edges. You're not as sharp around the edge of the frame. Taking stills especially, you will want to correct this in post for the lens correction. You do get slight distortion at the end of the frame, but for the most part, it's a fantastic lens. If you're taking maybe landscapes or you're taking pictures of buildings, it's fantastic for architecture. It is incredibly wide. I mean, you put this in front of your face and it feels like you're seeing more than you're seeing in real life. You can be incredibly close to this lens. You can have it really close to you or to your subject and still have them in focus. And in frame, it's kind of crazy how close you can be to this lens and still be in the shot. Again, you're going to get distortions close up. You are not going to want to shoot people with this, for the most part, or especially not close to the camera. If I was to be as close as I am now to this camera on a 14mm lens, it's going to look weird. You're going to have a shape distortion on the face, so that's not something I'd recommend. But as I said, property, you're trying to make space look big, or you're outdoors and you're trying to capture a lot in one photo, a lens like this is fantastic, and again, pretty cheap. So a lens I can't show you because it's currently on my camera is the Sony 24-240mm lens. This is a very expensive lens, which obviously is a factor for a lot of people. I did have to save up for quite a long time to buy this lens. The main reason I bought this lens was for some of the long range work I do. I often film theatre shows and things like that, and I need to be able to be very close into the subject from a long way away. So it's a 10 times zoom. 24 is a really nice wide lens. I think this lens is 3.5 to 6 aperture, so you're losing a lot of light towards the end of that, but that's how zooms work. You'd expect that. For me, this is a lens I now use a lot. It's almost made my 28-70 kind of like null and void. It's not really, the focal lengths of this are bigger. You get wider and a lot further in. The only difference is weight. This is a very heavy lens. It's a lot longer and it's heavy. It's about that size, and it really does have some weight to it. So, for example, I couldn't really use this on a gimbal. I could, but it wouldn't be a great use. It's a little bit too heavy, and you wouldn't want to be zooming in anyway, as you're going to change the weight and the balance of that gimbal, so that wouldn't really work. But as an all-in-one lens, this is really, really useful. If I'm going out and about and I need one lens, I only want to have one on me, this is the lens I'll use. I'm getting that full range, which can be really useful in so many scenarios. For me, for the types of things I use this lens for, it really is fantastic. Laser sharp. I've never seen any issue with any kind of distortion or problem on this lens. It's a really good, clean Sony lens, and I'd recommend this to anyone that needs that length or that zoom range in their image. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up all the kit I use at the moment. Sorry if this video kind of waffled on a bit and went a bit long. There's probably things I've forgotten about, there's things I'll talk about in the future. I aim with this channel to kind of delve into more of these things in specific, so I want to do a whole video about the gimbal, about how I use it, the reason I use it, kind of, you know, from a cinematography point of view, those kind of things, why you might choose to shoot a certain way, why you might not. I want to look at the light setups, which I'm only kind of getting used to still now, and all the other stuff I'll dive into more in the future. But this was just a kind of relatively quick overview of my kit and what bits of equipment I use. So yeah, so thanks for joining me today. I hope this has been interesting. It might not have been if you're not into cameras, but hopefully you can get something from it either way. And yeah, so I aim to do more of this kind of stuff in the future, so hopefully I'll see you then. Bro.